Great. So quick intros. I'm Danny. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the data director.
I'm Andrea. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the voter file manager.
Awesome. And if you have any questions, if you want to throw them in the chat, we'll respond to them at the Q&A portion at the end. And additionally, if you have any questions that are not necessarily aligned with what we're going over tonight, but any questions you think of or want to ask any questions in the future, you can email us at vanhelp@txdemocrats.org, and that will generate a ticket. You can also submit a ticket through our form at txdem.co/van-help. So quick agenda of what we're going to go through. We have a lot to go over tonight, so I am going to try and speak slowly, but we do have a lot of content to get through, so we will be moving through things quickly. So what we're going to go through tonight, we're going to do just a one slide quick refresh on create a list, and then we're going to walk through how to create functional but also complex lists in Van. So some of the ways that we recommend using multiple steps, building off of what we talked about last night. We'll also walk through some advanced and more additional create a list features that you may not have used as much before. And we'll also talk about how to use your lists. So once you've created your universe, different ways that you can use that beyond just virtual phone bank and cutting turf, though we will touch on those things as well. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. We do have a hard stop tonight at 5:55, so we're going to try to move through things efficiently, and I will try to speak slowly so that folks can understand what I'm saying. So a quick refresh of what is create a list. So creating a list is the first step for nearly everything that you do in Van. You will create a list for virtual phone banks. For really any voter contact purposes, you will create a list to cut turf, for canvassing, and you also create lists when you are sending mail to voters as well. And really any analysis that you want to do on your district or your precinct, or basically anything that you want to do in Van for voter contact purposes, you're going to start out by creating a list. Last night, we talked about a lot of the different search criteria that you use in creating a list. If you missed last night's training, we will be sending that recording around. And Andrea can also drop a link in the chat as well to some of our documentation on the different search criteria that you can use when you're creating a list. So we're going to talk a bit about creating a universe, which is a term that a lot of campaigns use, but is really just for county parties and precinct chairs, really if you're creating a list that is more than one step, it's probably going to be referred to as a universe. And it's just a larger and a bit more complex of a list than just, your precinct of voters. You'll usually have a few other criteria in there to get a more micro-targeted and advanced list of voters that you're trying to reach. But universes at their core have like a functional purpose. So when you're creating a list of voters for voter contact purposes, oftentimes that will be a universe. But a lot of times you create other types of lists. So if you want to see a list of all the voters that your county party has contacted this year, that's not necessarily going to be used for voter contact purposes, but a universe is going to be a large list of voters that you want to contact, either in your campaign, in your county party, in your precinct, whatever it may be. And any list that you create for voter contact purposes is generally going to include some combination of these things. Doesn't have to include all of them, but generally probably include some of these: targets, scores, voting history, survey questions, canvas status, using other saved lists that you have, addresses, and phone numbers. These are the most common search criteria we see folks from precinct chairs to county party users, campaigns, SDC members usually use one or multiple of these search criteria. And we talked a bit about more of these in detail last night. When creating a universe or just a large list for voter contact, which is a universe, we recommend starting big and then getting smaller. So step one of your search will generally be kind of your base search. So if you want all these voters in certain targets, that's usually what you're going to start out with. And then from there, you can add in more voters. So if you want to add in, for example, women aged 30 to 50 that have partisanship scores over 80, you want to add those additional people in on top of the targets that you already have. That's just an example. Don't have to do that. And then your final steps after you finish adding in all the voters that you might want, You can then go in and remove certain people. So for example, removing people who have been marked with a canvas result of refused, or remove people who were ID'd as like supporting your opponent in the primary, for example, or somebody who was ID'd as not wanting to volunteer. Whatever you want to do, that's where you'll remove people is at the end. And then depending on the type of voter contact that you're doing, if you are making phone calls, for example, one of your final steps is going to be narrowing to phones. If you're sending mail, the final step may be narrowing to addresses that have a USPS verified address. That just means that the United States Postal Service has verified that this is an actual mailing address, and your mail is less likely to be denied, and you won't have to pay for that unnecessary mailing. So in general, the rule of thumb is to never do an add step after a removal or a narrow step, because that will basically erase that removal or that narrowing that you have done previously. So you recommend adding all the people that you want and then getting smaller. The order that we kind of recommend doing things, and this is the way that I usually do it, there's no real wrong way to do it, but this can help kind of keep you a bit more organized as you're creating complex lists of voters for voter contact purposes. Recommend starting out with targets as your base group, and then adding in subsets of other voters with certain score parameters you want to see, then removing voters you don't want to include, and then narrowing for the contact type or narrowing to your district for block walking. This way, you can move those add steps around between each other and make sure that you're only removing people. Make sure you're moving everyone you want to include and not having things out of order. So I'm doing a first step and then add whoever you want, and then removals and narrows. Because both removals and narrow steps take people out of your universe, they can kind of be used interchangeably in that order. It doesn't matter if you do a narrow after removal or vice versa, but we recommend doing all of your add steps and then doing removal and narrow steps. So this is a great rule of thumb to follow. Definitely recommend this. We've seen a lot of really smart consultants that mess this up, unfortunately. So even people who are van experts mess this up all the time. It's not a big deal this happens, but if you're making a list and you're like, why are these Republicans still in my list? Check and make sure that you don't have an add step after a step that removed Republicans or something like that. That happens all the time. But following this rule of thumb can definitely help to make sure that your list is as clean as possible and there aren't any accidental mistakes. So I wanted to walk through a few create a list features that will hopefully make your life easier if you are regularly making lists for voter contact purposes. One of the things that I found the most helpful over the years is the householding step. So when you create a list and you have this new search, so for example, if we were creating a list of voters in these two targets over here and are in Travis County Precinct 110, we go to add step, we see the add people, remove people, narrow. Those are the ones that we use most often, but there's also this other one down at the bottom, householding. So householding allows you to do a few different things that can be particularly helpful for phone banking, for canvassing, and for sending mail. So there's three options here when you go to householding. There's fill household by, remove any person with a, and narrow list to one person per, which are very weird phrases to have in the dropdown and are not particularly intuitive. But basically what they do is fill household allows you to add everyone else to your list that is in the same address or shares a phone number with a voter in your list. This is helpful if you want to add in, if you're, say you're going block walking and you want to talk to whoever's in that household, even if they wouldn't have been in your list because they aren't in that target or they aren't in a score threshold that you set. This is also helpful if you just want to include every possible person that could be in that. You want to have all their information in your list when you're doing analysis or something like that. This can be helpful for that. This is also helpful if you're sending mail and you want to include the names of everyone in that household. That's an option if you want to do that. This exists. You can do that. Remove any person allows you to remove any person that has an address or phone number that is in another list or target. So for example, if you are sending a very progressive mail piece out about how your county party is standing for something and you want to make sure this does not get to a single household that has a Republican that lives in it, If you make a list that has everyone that's in, that has a score threshold below 30 or is in our persuasion target or something like that, and you save that as a saved list, you can then go into your new list and remove any person that has an address that is in that other list. So basically, you make a list of Republicans, and then you can remove anyone that has an address in that list of Republicans. And this can help you whittle down your list a lot. It'll make your list a lot smaller, but it'll help make sure that your mailers, your phone calls don't get to people that you don't want them to get to. And then narrow list to one person per basically allows you to narrow your list to one person per address or one person per phone number. So if you are making phone calls and you only have a few hours and you don't want to call, you don't want to have the same household multiple times show up in your list, you can narrow it to one person per phone number. And then that way there's only one time that phone number will show up in your list, and it helps to dedupe that. So here's a few more examples of how the householding step can help you out. Like I said, remove any person that shares an address with someone in the likely Republican target. This is especially helpful if you have a brand new volunteer that's going out, that's helping you out. You're a precinct chair, you got a new block captain, and they want to go out and talk to voters in the neighborhood, but they are deathly terrified of talking to Republicans. This can be really helpful for easing people in. We don't necessarily recommend this long term because a lot of times we have a lot of situations where we have great Democrats that are married to Republicans. We still want to talk to those good Democrats, make sure they're going out to vote and not just ignore them because they happen to live with a Republican. So this can be helpful though if you have a brand new volunteer or somebody who's really nervous to go out and knock on doors. I've done this before where I've cut lists for new volunteers that exclude people who share addresses with likely Republicans. You can also do this to say, for example, you're running a big text campaign and you want to do another batch of texts, but you don't want to text any phone numbers that have been texted already. You can remove anyone that shares a phone number with someone who has already been texted. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of situations where there are, a married couple and both of them have that same cell phone number on their profile. That's fine. And, a lot of times it might reach the same person. Sometimes people share cell phones. But if you want to make sure that you're not double texting, if you are in a super, super tight texting budget, especially if you're precinct chairs, you might have $50 a text, for the entire election cycle. And you just really want to make sure you're not double texting anyone at all. This is a great way to go about doing that. Additionally, if you want to make sure your list is householded for mail, basically that means it's just one person per mailing address. You can do that on the list, and you can also do it when you're printing the list for mail as well. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. So this is helpful if you are doing some more advanced list stuff, or if you just have specific use cases that you need. So if you want to remove anyone with a Republican address, this is how you do it. Another thing that is particularly helpful for dynamic universes that need to update over time is having variable time ranges for survey questions and Canvas results. Just a quick caveat here. If you are doing anything based off of variable time ranges, either in survey question responses, Canvas status, activist code responses, anything like that, make sure you're always saving it as a saved search and not as a saved list. Saved searches are dynamic and constantly update, whereas a saved list is static and will not update at all. So if you're doing anything with variable time ranges, or you just want to make sure that your list is always up to date, always save it as a saved search, so that way it'll update over time. In Van, you can set ranges to narrow or remove only certain people that were canvassed or attempted between certain dates. So you'll see this on the survey questions and Canvas status fields that'll allow you to select the date canvassed. You can select in the range of, or you can set just date ranges in general. But this allows you to, for example, if you want to remove anyone who was canvassed yesterday, anytime you pull a search, you don't want to talk to anyone who y'all talked to yesterday. You can select in the range of, and you can select things like yesterday. You can also select custom ranges, and you can do in the last 3 days, in the last 14 days, you can do in the last 55 days, whatever you want. You can have a lot of flexibility here to remove or narrow to people who have been canvassed with certain survey responses or have certain canvas results like not home, texted, refused, in certain date ranges, which is really, really helpful if you want to exclude people who you have talked to or attempted recently, but don't want to have to go and keep updating these individual dates that are set there. So oftentimes when we select date canvas, we'll just put a certain date like August 1st, 2021. This allows you to have it dynamically update over time, so you don't have to go into your search every few days and update that date. So it makes it a lot easier if you're using the same complex list over time. So we're going to talk about some ways to use your lists, and we have some Q&A portion at the end. I am happy to walk through and demo any of the things that I've shown you all on these slides previously. And if you just want to throw in the chat if there's any particular things that are helpful for me to walk through, I'm happy to do it after we get through this. So when you create a list, you will see a lot of, most people should see some of these things at the top. You'll see things like print, labels, calls, export, and so on. With that being said, a lot of times some of these may be grayed out. So for example, if your list is 20,000 people, you probably won't see cut turf because cut turf is maxed out at about 7,500 voter records. But in general, if your list is relatively small, just a precinct or two, you should see usually all of these. And most of the time, as a precinct chair, you might have only ever used calls or cut turf. Those are the most common ones. We're going to talk about those first. But there's a lot of these other ones that can be particularly helpful if you're doing helping out with larger voter contact operations. So for calls, this is what you'll click to send your list to a virtual phone bank and start making calls. You can choose to push the list as a static saved list or as a dynamic saved search. We always recommend doing the dynamic saved search so that your virtual phone bank is always up to date. One issue that we saw a lot last cycle was that we had I think it was a campaign that they had their virtual phone bank set up as a saved list, and that list excluded people who had already early voted. The problem is that because it was a saved list and not a dynamic saved search, even when they refreshed their virtual phone bank, it still wasn't excluding early voters because they were working out of a saved list and not that saved search. So just to make sure that your list is always up to date, we always recommend doing it as a dynamic saved search for virtual phone banks so that your virtual phone bank is always the most up to date that it can possibly be. So when you click that calls button on your search, it'll pop up with this, and you can select the use the static list or save and use my search criteria. And you can just save it in a folder, either create a new one or use one that you already have, name it and give it a description, and this will save it as a saved search and then push you onto the virtual phone bank page where you can give the virtual phone bank a name, a description, set the script you want to use, set the start date and the end date for the virtual phone bank. And then you can also select the virtual phone bank settings you want, including like the operation hours and things like that. And you can also set whether or not you want it available on Open Virtual Phone Bank. If you've made calls before, you've probably used an Open Virtual Phone Bank. It's just the link that you can use to make calls instead of having to be logged in on VAN directly. And then you'll just click next and you can go ahead and start making calls. We have a lot of documentation on making virtual phone banks and using virtual phone banks in our FAQ. So if you want more info here, are confused, or want to learn more about it, we are happy to assist with that. Another one is cut turf. We have a very expansive recorded training that I actually just did a few weeks ago on cutting turf. So I'm not going to go too in depth on cutting turf and knocking on doors and using minivan and stuff. But to get started with cutting turf, you'll select that cut turf button from my list. And then you can go ahead and you'll draw the little lines on the map. So as you can see here in the top right corner, there's the dots that represent a voter's household. And then you will just drop pinpoints to draw the lines and close them out and create turfs. You will draw all of them or however many you want, click save and finish, and then you can go to turfs and you can generate list number, put that list number into your minivan app on your smartphone or tablet, and then go out and start knocking on doors. So that is how you do that. If you go to mytexaslearns.com, and Andrea, if you could drop the link in the chat, there is a recorded training on there that I did a few weeks ago that you can watch on cutting turf, using minivan, all that good stuff. I will flag as well though, list numbers. So if you generate a list number or just print it for minivan or send it to minivan, those list numbers do expire after 30 days. So basically that means that we usually recommend cutting turf, a few days before you need it. I wouldn't recommend trying to cut turf now for October 2022. And additionally, we have observed issues with multiple people using the same list on the same day. So in general, a list number should be used for one person. If you have, one volunteer that's only going to knock 10 doors, just cut 10 doors for them. It doesn't need to be, 50 doors per turf. It can be whatever makes sense for you and for other people that you are assisting with voter contact work. I also want to flag that if you are cutting turf or you're a county party chair or a van admin, you should always be going through your minivan commits on van, which you will find on the homepage and on the sidebar. And that is where you'll actually confirm that voter contact work should be applied in van. And you'll just select the list numbers from the checkbox and click commit, and then they'll be visible in van for all of your users. So just wanted to flag that, you can cut turf, sync it in minivan, but it does still need to be committed within van. Another thing you can do with your list is you can print. So the print function has a not super intuitive name. Basically what it does is it can generate a PDF of the voter records in your list. So if I use this a lot actually when I had my candidate doing call time of voters that he had talked to and they were a strong supporter, and now he wanted to go through and have a personal conversation with them on the phone and see if they could donate, $20 to the campaign. So this is helpful if you just want a PDF of the records in your list ordered in a certain way with information like address, phone number, and voting history. That's what it's used for. This does not generate an Excel sheet or a CSV. This just generates and creates a PDF, so an uneditable document of the van records. You can select the report format you want, which is basically just the formatting for the PDF. We have some defaults in van already that are shared with all the van committees, and you can also create your own within van if you're above, I believe, a Texas 4, Texas 5. And this basically just determines the formatting and the fields that are used in your printed PDF report. Print does not actually print it into your printer. It generates a PDF, and you'll go to the generated PDFs link in van that it'll show you after you click print. And from there, you can choose to print it, send it to your printer and print it out. You can also save it to your desktop and use it as a regular PDF. So this is what it'll look like. You will select your report format. You can select contacted how, you can name it, you can select a sort order, and then you'll just click the print button and it'll generate a PDF for you in the formatting that you set. Next one is labels. So if you are sending a mailing, your precinct chair, and you want to send a letter to all of the Democratic voters in your precinct and let them know about an event that you're doing, for example, labels is a great way to generate the mailing labels for that. It has a few defaults. I think they're mostly Avery mailing labels. I have found personally that a lot of times they don't perfectly match up with my printer. So I would definitely do a test run of it. Don't try and test it with 20,000 labels. Maybe test it with one sheet of 30 labels so you don't waste a bunch of them, to make sure that it lines up with your printer. That being said, I have found better luck with exporting a household mailing list, which I'll talk about in the next slide, and then doing a mail merge in Microsoft Word on my computer to make the labels instead. But if you're in a bind and a time crunch and you just need the labels, it is available in van, and this is how you can do it within van without having to do a mail merge. So all you'll do is you'll click the labels button on your list. You can title the labels and select the label format, which will show, I think there's only 3 or 4 options that are available in van. You'll choose the householding type. So I usually recommend doing 1 label per person or 1 label per address, depending on the purpose of your voter contact work. Then you can select a household label. So if you household it by address, so you know, you have the Smith family all at 123 Main Street, it'll show the Smith family instead of like, you know, John and Jean Smith. And you can also set the order as well here. Next option is export, which a lot of y'all are probably already familiar with. Exporting is how you push your list of voter records into a CSV, which is basically just an Excel file, or into a Google Sheet. Van, a few years ago, started allowing folks to export to Google Sheets, which is really helpful if you don't have Microsoft Excel on your computer, or if you have a Chromebook or something similar. So you can use the export function to push your list to a local file like a CSV or into Google Sheet. When you export, you'll select the formatting that you want and the fields that you want to include. The most common formats that we see folks use are a household and mailing list, which is what you'll use for sending mail or generating labels for mail. Household and phone list is great for robocalls if you're doing those. And standard text is the catch-all export format that this allows you to choose whatever fields you want to include in your export. So if you want to include a column for every single target that a voter is in, or you know what scores they have, or if you want to include their legislative districts or their county commissioner district or justice of the peace district, you can do that in standard text. Standard text is great if you want to kind of do a more general export, or if you're exporting into another platform. So for example, if your county party is using ThruTalk, you'll probably use standard text for that. And so when you click export, it'll send you to this export wizard. Don't know why it's called that. But you can select the export format that you want from this dropdown, and it'll also give you a little description of what that export format is before you go ahead with the export. So here, for example, household and mailing list, it'll allow you to select, it'll show you that you're exporting one record for every mailable household in your list, including just the fields that you need to prepare a mailing. So for a mailing, you don't necessarily need to see what legislative district somebody is in. You just need to know their mailing address and their name and their van ID. So it just gives you what you need for that purpose. So this is really helpful if you just want a really easy way to export a mailing list and get started using it right away. You can customize this export and add in a few other fields. And then under export as is where you'll select if you want it as a CSV, which is just, it's short for comma separated values. It's just basically an Excel sheet, or if you want it as a Google Sheet. If you select a Google Sheet, you will have to log into your Google account and then give it allow permissions, which just allows it to create a Google Doc on your account. And then you will have the link to that Google Sheet and be able to start using it right away. Counts is another function that you can do with your lists. This allows you to pull counts of your voters based on parameters that you set. So for example, I'll show a few examples here, but if you want to see, for example, how many voters are in each precinct in your district, or how many voters are in each target in each precinct in your district. You can also see, you know, if you want to see in your precinct, like how many voters of each age and by each gender are in each precinct. You can also see a breakdown of how many voters in each precinct are in each target. So when you click on counts, you can run quick counts and crosstabs, which will take you to a page that looks like this. You can also run counts and crosstabs with each format, which basically is a preset format for these. There are not any defaults for those in your van committee. And in general, unless you want to have an emailed daily report of counts, you're probably better off just doing quick counts and crosstabs. So here, all I did was I selected the column. I wanted to do a column of county and a column of precinct in the list that I created. And so now I can see that there are, 949 voters that were in my list that are in Bowie Precinct 1A. So this is really helpful if you want to see. I think the list I created was just people in targets like in tier 1 and tier 2. And in State House District 1, I think was the list I created. And these are the counts in each precinct. And column is like a vertical column. So I have column 1 is county, column 2 is precinct. And then it gives me totals on the right-hand side. Then if I want to see, this gives you an example of what a crosstab is. So column 1, I have age, and it breaks it down in age brackets. And then I have crosstabs for sex that show not just like how many men and how many women there are, of which there are, 10,428 men in my list, but there are 978 men in my list that are age 18 to 24 and 1,163 women age 18 to 64. So this is really helpful if you want to kind of get a bird's eye view of age and sex breakdown in your district, in your precinct, on your list, what have you. And it gives you the totals on each side. So on the X and Y axis, so we can see here the total people age 18 to 24, total 25 to 34. If we go down to this axis, we can see the total number of men, the total number of women, and the total overall. So this is helpful getting a bird's eye view of the counts of these demographics. Another example is looking at a crosstab of likely party voters by precinct in a district. So all I did up here was on crosstab. I did likely party voters under targets, and we can see the number of Democrats versus people in the Republican target in each precinct. These numbers don't seem, oh, okay. So the reason that we're seeing 0 Republicans here is because I had selected people in our like tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, I think. And so it's showing almost entirely Democrats. This is not like a countywide look. This is just the targets I had selected. So this is expected, and I would expect to see, very low numbers of unknown because I do have our tier 3 like unknown voters in there. And then total people, we can see here the total number of folks in that precinct in my list. And we can see the number of Democrats in my list in each precinct, the number of unknowns. So this is really helpful if you want to see like precincts and kind of how they break down across the targets. And I am happy to demo all these things. And I have some more things in appendix if there's anything else you all have questions about. But Andrea, where should we get started?
So the first question that we had was about cell phone numbers and getting those out. I know that a lot of the times we don't actually think it's best practice to get those out of VAN in the export way and to use API keys instead. So if you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So let's do an example. We are a county party that's going to send some text to voters and make sure they're going to get out and vote in the primary. So all I'm doing right now is logging into VAN. I'm going to go in and create a list. Just a quick reminder, there's 3 ways to find the create a list page. You can do create a list in the home page right here, create a list in the sidebar. You'll click these little 3 horizontal lines, do create a list. We can also search for it. All takes you to the same page. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on my VAN a little bit. So, because it takes a minute or so to load, I'm creating a new search. If I want to pull a list of all of the cell phones in my precinct, I'm going to find my precinct. I'm going to go to county, select my county, then I'm going to select my precinct. And I'm going to just preview my results. I like to do this every time I add a new search parameter just to make sure that I'm doing everything right. That is very weird. Okay, give me 1 second. Why is it showing such a low number? It's very odd. Okay, there we go. That's a better number that we'd like. So we have about 2,000 people in this list right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to phones. And I can do this within step 1, or I can also add a step and narrow people. I prefer to keep my list as few steps as possible because it's easier to do some quality assurance at the end. And it also just makes it go a bit faster because I don't have to wait for VAN to load in between adding each step. So the way that I can narrow to cell phones, I always like to do an initial narrow to phone numbers. And the way that I prefer to do that is by go to source and check all. Every phone number is going to have a source. And so this is going to narrow to voters that have phone numbers. And it's going to send my list down to 1,700 people. And I'm also, the way to narrow to cell phones, there's 2 ways. You can do verified and likely cell. These are going to be phone numbers that, when they were uploaded to VAN, they were marked as like a verified or likely cell. Or, I go into VAN and I add my own phone number. I know my phone number is a cell phone. I add it as a verified cell. That's one way to do it. However, what I would recommend if you're using an API, so if you're using Hustle or Through Text or Spoke for your texting, I would recommend checking off this textable phones only checkbox. And these are phone numbers that have been flagged as textable. This doesn't necessarily mean that if a voter doesn't have a textable phone number, that it's not a cell phone, but rather it just means that a lot of times these API integrations won't pull in cell phones unless they have this textable phones only flag. So if you're using a texting platform, definitely recommend just clicking off this checkbox here. But if you're doing phone calls and you want to try and narrow to cell phones, but it's not the biggest deal if it's a landline here and there, I would use the is a cell delineator. But if you really want to make sure it's only cell phones, no landlines at all, I would choose this textable phones only flag. So we're going to preview results, and this is going to send it down to 1,418 people. We can also put in some phone quality scores here. If say we have a really tight budget and we want to make sure that we are texting the right phone number for the right person, we want to include only people that have a very high or a high phone quality score. A high phone quality score or a low phone quality score doesn't necessarily mean that it is a business phone number or disconnected, but it means that we're less confident that phone number 123 actually belongs to John Smith, for example. It doesn't mean that it is a bad phone number. It just means we're a bit less confident that it actually belongs to the person that we think it does. But very high and high phone confidence means that we have either contacted that person at phone number before and it's been successful. It also could mean that a user, van user themselves, added that phone number for that person, which means it has a 100% confidence that it belongs to that voter. So if we then narrow it to people, only people who have very high or high phone quality scores, we then put it down to 1,279 people. If we have a super, super tight budget, we need to get it down to 1,000, you could probably just do very high and still get a lot of good people in there. So now we can run that search, and from here we can export it. If you have cell export permissions, which most people don't, vast majority don't, only a few hundred people do. But if you are exporting this for Through Talk, for example, and we've had a conversation about it, you can export it and export the phones there. Or if you are using a texting app like Hustle, Through Text, or Spoke, you can click this little messages button if your API has been configured and just push it right into the platform. So here I can select my SMS provider. I can select Blue Link or Hustle, which is what I have set up in my van committee. Yours is going to look different. I can select the folder that I want to save this list to, set the list name, add a list description, and then send it over to the platform that I'm using. If you are not seeing this messages button white like this, check with your van admin, and they'll need to request an API key. If you are the van admin, you'll need to request an API key. And if you have issues with that, just send us a help ticket and we'll help you out. No problem at all. So it is narrowing to cell phones and using that. I saw a question here about wanting a demo of counts and crosstabs. Is there anything else that would be helpful to get to before that, Andrea?
Yeah, we have a little follow-up in here, is that they're not seeing phone quality scores in my campaign, and why wouldn't that be there?
Yeah, phone quality scores in my campaign aren't really there because it's assumed that the phone numbers that are in your my campaign are the right ones because you would have contacted the person with that number. With that being said, so one of the weird things that happens with my campaign is, so a lot of times the people that are in your my campaign were pushed over because they responded, for example, yes to a volunteer survey question. They'll be pushed over immediately into my campaign, and the phone numbers that were attached to their my voter record are going to continue to be in their my campaign record. But if you add voters manually, they aren't going to have the same kinds of like phone quality scores because they will be manual ads, and we're going to assume that their phone qualities are correct. I do believe that phone quality scores still do exist in the back end. So if you're doing a lot of work with your my campaign stuff, let us know and we can probably help out with trying to find the best phone numbers for you from your my campaign, especially if you have a lot of voters that you're trying to text or call out of your my campaign and doing some volunteer recruitment there. We can definitely assist and try to do some stuff on the back end to help you out.
One more
Yeah.
that a couple of people, what are some best practices for reviewing minivan contact information before you commit?
Totally. I love this question. I actually was talking to a friend the other day about how, I've seen so many people who have unfortunately faked minivan data over the years, and it is really sad to see something that happen sometimes. So I'm going to show you how to check that. Let's see if, Collin County does a lot of great stuff. Let's see if y'all have any things that are committed. Harris County. Cool. So the Harris County Dems have been doing some canvases. That's awesome. It's going to default to this pending page. Let's see if we don't need pending. Okay. So usually you're going to check pending for committing minivan data. But I'm going to go into committed to show an example. So this data has already been committed into van, which is awesome. We can go in and create a list of this data. It'll be visible on voters' records. But what you're going to do to see actual like minivan data, like voter by voter for each minivan sync, is you're going to see, you can see the list number here. You can see who canvassed it. You can see the date. And we're going to click this little blue. It's hyperlinked. It's blue. We're going to click the 14 here. And we can see the voter's name, their address, and what the volunteer marked. So we can see for this person, for Jennifer Atwood, the volunteer marked not home. For these other people, they marked refused. We can also see here for Alfonso, the volunteer marked canvassed, and they marked one survey response. So if they marked 2, 3, 4, or like they marked 2 survey responses for this person, it'll show as a 2. What you'll want to look for is a lot of refusals or like a lot of deceases. Those are pretty unexpected and kind of weird. This is a good amount of refusals for this one person. I would probably have a conversation with this volunteer about when to mark refused versus when to mark Republican versus when to mark not home. But the most important thing to look for like faked data is the amount of time in between these date canvassed over here. What this does is this date canvassed is showing the time that the voter's information was marked in minivan. It's not showing the time that it was synced. So a lot of times you might see, if you see like just a minute or like 30 seconds in between all of these responses, and the volunteers, they knocked on 50 doors, but they're showing like a minute in between each door, that volunteer was either like they marked all of it on paper and then marked all of it afterwards on minivan, which is not efficient. They should be retrained and given assistance to the minivan. Or alternatively, unfortunately, that person was just sitting in their car and marked fake data so they could, maybe get some volunteer credit for school, or they weren't feeling well and didn't want to knock on doors and just marked everyone as not home, which is unfortunate, but it does happen. I had a volunteer in 2018 who had been faking data for months, was marking refusals, deceased, Republican, and Democrat survey responses. And the only way that we caught it was by looking through the minivan commit history. And so it's really important to check this, not necessarily for every single volunteer. You'll obviously have trusted volunteers. And there's always going to be people who would never do something like that. But it's a good idea to check, even if somebody just needs to be retrained on how to use minivan, to see how long is between each of these minivan marks. So for example, like a minute or 2 in between each door is totally expected and totally normal. You can look at the addresses and see 8623, 956, they marked that, 8538, a few minutes later, that's totally normal. They have to walk between doors, they have to have more conversations. This looks like a really strong and really normal time in between these doors. A bit more refusals than we'd like, but probably worth a conversation with this volunteer about when to mark refused. But otherwise, these are kind of the things that you look for to just make sure things look normal. Also, if you do realize that a volunteer had been faking data or marking things bad, please let us know and we can have Van roll back that data and have everything undone if you notice anything has gone wrong for a while and need anything undone after the data has been committed. And yeah, John, that's a great point about lit drop. And that's why, these things are done on a committee by committee basis. We don't go through and do minivan commit stuff, but absolutely, if you or volunteers are doing lit drops, they're going to be a lot shorter in between each house than just like a few minutes. It'll definitely be a lot faster of responses marked there. That is all I have for minivan commit stuff. Any other questions that would be helpful at the moment, Andrea?
There was one that I'm trying to go back to find about save. Oh, here we go. Is there a disadvantage to saving a list almost immediately to a folder? Can I still add or remove things to that list?
This is a great question. So one of my worst traits is that I will like be creating lists in Van and then I will get sidetracked. And then 15 minutes later, I'm logged out of Van and I forget my list. I've lost it, freaking out. It's not great. So whenever I am making a list, I will usually go through and save the list. And if I save it as a saved search, I can go back into that folder later on, load that saved search, and I can edit existing steps. I can add more steps. I can remove things. I have a folder that I just dump things into that don't have a place yet. I just call it my testing folder. But you can create whatever folders you want and add it to a folder, and you can later on replace that search. So for example, I have been working on this one search and I'm not done with it yet, but I save it just because I'm not done with it quite yet. I save it as a saved search in this folder. And then later on, I reload that search, and now I want to replace it. Say, for example, I want to replace my list created for training. Now I can go in and I can replace this search. It's going to overwrite that one that I was working on previously and be the most updated version of that search. So yeah, you can absolutely save it right away and reload it. So if I go into my folders, I can see if I search my folder name or just go to it, I can see all my saved searches that I have here. And I can reload a search. For example, if I want to reload this search, I can just load it and it's going to overwrite the current version of my list. And then I'll have the search loaded in and I can edit the existing search. I can add a new step right away. But if I just want to edit the search, I can go in and edit search parameters or add steps, remove steps, whatever I need. Awesome. Is it helpful for me to go through counts and crosstabs now, Andrea? I know we only have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I think that was the last question I saw before
Awesome.
the counts and crosstabs.
Great. So I have my list loaded. I'm going to go to counts. Again, I have two options here. It'll default to run quick counts and crosstabs. And the other option is run counts and crosstabs with formats. If you want to have like an email to you every single day with a number of people who are canvassed in each precinct in your district, that is what you will use the format for, because you can schedule counts and crosstabs from that. If you are doing that, it is very confusing, very weird, took me a long time to figure out. We are happy to help you. Please submit a help ticket and we can help you hands-on. Most people though will do run quick counts and crosstabs because you want a one-time snapshot of a list or a district or a target, or you just want to export it to Excel and go from there and do some analysis on your own. So you can do run quick counts and crosstabs. You'll hit next and it'll default to your list. You can also select people from registered voters in your district if you want, but it'll default to your list. So column one, it'll pop up in with these options. So columns are like a column on an Excel sheet. It's just like a vertical column of fields. Crosstabs are horizontal, so it'll put like, you know, all the different age brackets horizontally, whereas if you have it on column, it'll put all the age brackets vertically. So data field is where you're going to get most things about voters that would like come from the voter file. So for example, if you want to see their age, districts they're in, their county, their precinct, things like that, this is where you'll see those fields. So if we want to see their precinct, we can refresh results and it'll give us a count of voters in each precinct. I had one precinct loaded into my list, so we're seeing just one here, and it'll give a total count of voters in that column and voters overall. Alternatively, if we want to see, let's look at a count of voters of each sex, we can see that here as well. So that's how it looks when you have it on the column. And if we want to do a crosstab of voters by age, I will point out one thing that has really stumped a lot of people. Crosstab has a lot fewer options to select than column does. So if you're trying to pull counts of voters in each precinct, it doesn't show up on crosstab because it shows up horizontally. And so it limits the amounts of fields that you can use here. But if you're like, I'm not seeing precinct under data field, why isn't it there? It's under column, check that instead. So if I want to look at age on the crosstab, we can pull that and it looks like this. And now we can see, there are 70 women aged 18 to 24 in our precinct. And we can also show percentages by clicking this little checkbox. And this will add in an additional column that doesn't just show us the actual count, but the percentage overall. So 19.55% of our list somehow, it's weird. The percentages are a little wonky, but it does like percentages across the crosstab. So 19.55% of our women are age 18 to 24, which is not super intuitive and not the best. So what I would recommend is you can export to Excel, and this will create an Excel sheet of the counts and crosstabs that you have. And then you can just work out of Excel, do any like graphs and charts that you want to do any math that you want to do on top of this. But this is a great way to basically just like create your list and then pull some like top line numbers out of it. And then you can just push it to Excel and do all the work that you want to do outside of Van on these counts and crosstabs. You can also run multiple crosstabs, as you can see here. I usually just try and do most of my stuff in columns and maybe one crosstab. If it gets to be more advanced than that, just send us a help ticket and we can see if there's like a better, easier way to do what you're trying to do. There probably is. Doing this within Van for more than like 2 columns and 2 crosstabs can be super finicky and not always get you what you actually want. I did want to show quickly here that because I pulled this from my list, I can see my search parameters within this. So if I'm like, I try to pull counts of my precinct, why aren't more precincts coming up? I can go to my list and be like, oh wait, that's because it was only precinct 235. Like that's why it's not showing more. So yeah, that is how you do that. If you export to Excel, it'll just generate a Excel sheet and you can download it right away. Any other questions at the moment? I know you have to hop off in just a minute.
Yeah, just quickly, there was one. Is it possible to save an export profile that applies to multiple Van accounts without the need to recreate them one by one?
Could you rephrase the question? Just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Daniel, if you want to.
Oh, uploading shared export format. There is not a way, to my knowledge, to share export formats in Van. This would be a great ticket, Andre, if you want to send it to Van to see if there is one. I know you can,
For sure.
You can share bulk upload mapping templates. I don't know that export formats are something that can be shared between users. I think it might be individual to a user, but this is a great question and something we might be able to do. But at this moment, I don't know the way to. If someone does, that would be awesome, but I don't know if there is a way. Awesome. Well, we have been recording this. We will send this recording around tomorrow. Really appreciate everyone's time tonight. And yeah, we will see everyone at next month's training. You can sign up for the training, txm.co/data-trainings, and we'll put the recordings for those as well on that page. But thanks so much, y'all. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a good one.